The chain broke in the middle of my own council feast. I heard it go, one hard crack of iron under the music, and then the doors at the low end of the hall came open with 100 weight of werewolf behind them. Grieve came through at a dead run, scarred gray and shoulder high, the trailing link skidding sparks off the flagstones. My council went up out of their chairs. Someone's goblet burst on the floor. 2 of my guard put their spears down flat and then thought better of it, because there is no man in Veamore who wants to be the one who blooded my werewolf. He didn't come to me. That was the part that stopped my heart, if you want the truth of it. In 7 winters that wolf had come to me and to no one else living, and now he crossed my hall without a look and turned back to the doors, and he was dragging something. Someone's sleeve. There was a girl on the end of it. She was not fighting him. That was the second thing that stopped my heart. She had her feet under her and her arm out long, going where the sleeve went at a fast walk, one hand up trying to keep her lantern from swinging into anyone, and when the light found her face there was no terror in it at all. There was exasperation. The look a woman gives a big dog who has done something enormous and stupid in front of company. "Grieve," she said, not a shout. "Grieve, let go." He let go. Right there in the middle of my hall, with 40 of the highest blood of the moor standing frozen at their own table, that wolf opened his jaws, set himself down on the stone at her feet, and looked up at her exactly the way a pup looks up at the one who feeds it. The hall went so quiet I could hear the fire. "That wolf kills what touches him," said my houndmaster Osric from somewhere down the table. His voice had gone thin. "Girl, don't move, don't move." She looked at Osric like she'd only just remembered there were other people in the room. Then she looked down at Grieve, and I will remember this until they lay me in the moor. She took her hand off her lantern and put it flat on that wolf's ruined old head, in front of every lord of Veamore, and scratched behind the notch where his left ear used to be. Grieve leaned into it and shut his eyes. I had been standing without knowing I'd stood. My chair was somewhere behind me, down in my chest, in the place where my own wolf had been kennelled and silent since the war, since the moor, since the 9 of them came home broken and I came home worse. Something came to the door. Not a howl, not a surge, just the sound a thing makes when it lifts its head after a long time lying down and looks toward a sound it knows. I knew her the way you know your own hand in the dark. Before I'd asked her name, before I'd asked anything. "Whose sleeve is that?" I said. The girl straightened. She had heather mud to the knee and a kennel apron under a coat that had been mended more times than it was ever new, and she looked at me, at the crown, at the table, at the whole cold weight of Veamore watching her, and she did not go pale and she did not curtsy badly. "Mine, your grace," she said. "He's had it before." "Before?" "Twice this week." She said it apologetically as if she were confessing on the wolf's behalf. "He fetches. I don't know who taught him." "Nobody taught him," I said. "He was bred to break a shield wall." "Then he's found a hobby," she said, and somewhere down the table one of my younger cousins made a sound that he tried very hard to turn into a cough. Osric was already coming up the hall, red to the collar. "Your Grace, forgive it. She's a kennel hand, she's nothing. She's had no leave to be in the hold at this hour." "She's a what?" "A kennel hand," Osric said. "Tamsin, row. She mucks the runs, your Grace, that's the whole of it, she's not." "Osric," I said, "how long has she mucked my runs?" He stopped. I watched him do the arithmetic of a man realizing he does not know the answer to something he should. "Since the spring," the girl said when he didn't. "The Feast of Marrow. Your steward hired me at the gate. He didn't ask my name either, your Grace, so it's no fault of the houndmaster's." She was covering for him. She'd been in my hall 90 seconds, and she was covering for the man who just called her nothing. "Since the spring," I repeated. "Yes, your Grace." "And in that time," I said slowly, "how many hands have you put on that wolf?" Tamsin Rowe looked down at Grieve, who had not moved off her boot, and I saw her weigh whether the truth would get her turned out at the gate in the rain. She told it anyway. "Both of them, your grace," she said, "most days. Let me tell you about my 9, and then you'll understand what she'd done. Veamor keeps werewolves the way other holds keep cavalry. They are not pets, and they are not spirits, and they are not stories. They are great gray animals bred over 400 years to stand in a line with men and not break, and they are the reason this hold has never once been taken. My father ran 40 of them. I took 110 out onto the moor in the year I was crowned, against a thing that had come down out of the north and eaten 3 villages before anyone thought to send word. 9 came home. 9 out of 110. And the men, I won't put the number of the men in this. It was worse. What came home wasn't a pack, it was a wreckage. Grieve with his ear gone and his ribs showing through where the fur never grew back. Marrow blind in the near eye. Thistle who wouldn't take food from a hand for a year and only ate what you left and walked away from. 2 of them would not go through a doorway. One of them, little Ash, the smallest, would not stop looking for a wolf who wasn't there every dawn at the gate for 4 months. And they would not be touched, not by Osric who'd whelped half of them, not by the wolf leeches I sent for from 3 kingdoms, not by me, especially not by me, and I understood it because I was the one who'd walked them out onto that moor, and whatever they knew of that day, they knew it in their bones, and I was standing in the middle of it. I tried for 2 years. I want that on the record since I'm telling it. I sat in those runs in the rain until my hands went blue. I bled twice for it, once badly. And at the end of the 2nd year, Osric said, "Your Grace, it's cruelty now to them and to you," and he was right, and I stopped. So for 5 winters after that, Veamor's werewolves were fed by pole and pail, meat pushed under a gate, water changed through a hatch. 9 of the finest animals ever bred on this moor living out their old age like prisoners, because the only thing anybody could think to do for them was leave them alone. That is what she walked into in the spring, with no name and no leave and nobody to tell her it was impossible. "Both of them," I said, "most days." Osric made a noise. My cousin Rennick set his cup down very carefully. And down the table in the good seat in the deep green that suited her, Lady Wynne of the Sallowfield, whom my counsel had spent 2 years steering me toward the way you steer a horse who has stopped pretending to be interested, laughed. Not cruelly. Wynne was never cruel. She was worse than cruel, she was certain. "Oh, come," she said warmly. "Torin, the girl's boasting. It's charming, but there are lords here who lost hands to those animals." "One lord," I said, 2 fingers, and he'd gone in with a switch." "Even so." "Even so," I agreed, and I came down off the dais. "I'll tell you what I meant to do. I meant to walk down there and put an end to it, send the girl to her bed, have the chain seen to, apologize to my table, and go back to the seat where I was supposed to sit and be a king who has his kennels in order. That was the plan, all the way down the length of that hall. And then I got within 6 feet of Grieve, and Grieve did not get up. You have to understand, that wolf had put himself between me and a shield wall. That wolf slept across my tent flap for 9 years. In 7 winters he had not once let me get within 6 feet of him without going to his feet and going away, and he did it gently, which was the part that took the skin off. He'd never snarled at me once. He just went away, every time, like a man being polite about a thing he can't forgive. He did not get up. He looked at me from the floor with his old ruined head on Tamsin Rowe's boot, and he wagged his tail. Twice. Slow. Thumping on the stone in front of 40 people for the first time in 7 years. I have taken a spear point through the shoulder, and I did not make the sound I made then. I don't think anyone heard it. I hope not. "Your Grace," the girl said quietly, just to me, she'd seen it. "How?" I said. "Sorry." "How?" My voice came out of me like gravel out of a cart. 5 winters, girl, I sent to Kessel for a man who calms sea beasts. I sent to the north for a woman who was supposed to sing them down. I sat in that mud until my own physician wept at me. How? Tamsin Rowe thought about it. She actually thought about it. Nobody in my hall had taken a question of mine seriously enough to think about it in years. They all just started talking, and she said, "I didn't want anything from them, Your Grace." I stood there. That's not I'm saying it badly. She pushed her hair back with the back of her wrist, the way you do when your hands are dirty. Everyone who comes to them wants something, wants them fixed, wants them to be what they were. They can smell that on a person like smoke, and it's a weight, and they've got no strength for carrying anybody else's hope. They've barely enough for their own breathing. So I didn't bring any. I just did the work. I mucked and I fed and I sat with my back to them and mended tack where they could see my hands, and I never once looked at them like they were a thing that wanted mending. For about 40 days, Your Grace, I was furniture. And then Marrow came and put her chin on my knee while I was crying about something else entirely, said Tamsin Rowe. And that was that. I want to be honest about the next part, because it does me no credit. I did not do the right thing that night. The right thing would have been to name her houndmistress on the spot, or at the least to say thank you in front of the people who'd heard my houndmaster call her nothing. What I did was stand there with my whole chest sounding like a struck bell and say, "See the wolf back to his run," and turn around and go up to my seat and sit in it, because 40 of the highest blood of the moor were watching their king get his heart handed to him by a girl in a kennel apron, and I was not ready to let them see the size of it. She saw, I know she saw. She took Grieve out of my hall by nothing but a hand under his jaw, and she went, and she didn't look back, and the doors shut, and Wynne said, "Well, that's one for the ballads," and everyone laughed, and I sat there and let them. That was the first night. I went down to the kennels at 3 in the morning like a thief in my own hold. She was there, of course she was there. There was a lantern hung on the post at the end of the long run, and Tamsin Rowe was sat on an overturned pail with a tangle of harness across her knees, working a knot out of it with her thumbs. And the 9 of them, my ruin, my dead-end walking, were lying in the wet straw around her like a hearthful of dogs. Ash had her head against the girl's ankle. Thistle, who ate nothing from a hand for a year, was flat out on his side with his back against the pail. And Grieve was awake, because Grieve was always awake. That was the thing the moor had done to him. Grieve was lying across the gate side with his head up, keeping the door, the way he'd kept my tent flap for 9 years. I stopped in the dark outside the lantern light, and I stood there like a fool, and I looked at the thing I'd been told for 5 years was not possible. "You can come in," she said without looking up, "but come in slow and come in for nothing." "Come in for nothing," I repeated. "Don't come in wanting, Your Grace." The knot came loose under her thumbs. "Come in the way you'd come into a room where somebody's sleeping, not to get anything, just to be in it." I came in for nothing. I had to sit on the ground because there was one pail and she was on it. A king of Vaemor sat down in the wet straw at 3 in the morning in his good coat, and put his back against the post, and looked at nothing in particular, and did not reach for anything. It took an hour. At the end of that hour, Marrow, blind Marrow, who I had once carried 2 miles with her guts in my shirt, got up out of the straw, came across the run, and lay down against my leg with the whole weight of herself, the way they do when they mean it. I didn't move. I want you to know I didn't move, because I understood by then what moving would cost. I sat there with my werewolf spine against my thigh and my eyes streaming in the dark, silent, like a boy, and Tamsin Rowe worked her harness and looked at her hands and let me have it in private. After a while she said, conversationally to the harness, "She's been asking after you, that one." "Wolves don't ask." "They do, Your Grace," said Tamsin Rowe. "You just have to be furniture long enough to hear it." Here is what I learned over the next month, going down to my own kennels every night like a man with a habit he can't name. That she'd come to Vaemor from the flats below Sallowfield with everything she owned in a grain sack, after her father's kennel was sold out from under him for a debt her uncle made, and that she'd walked it, and that when I asked how far she said, "A fair way," in a tone that ended the subject. That she was 26 and had been putting her hands on animals nobody else could touch since she was 9, and thought absolutely nothing of it, the way a woman who has always been able to do a thing thinks nothing of it. That she talked to them in complete sentences about her day, not baby talk, not commands. She'd sit in the straw and tell Thistle at length about the price of rope. That my steward paid her 11 copper a month, which was less than I paid the boy who did nothing but turn the spit, and that when I found this out and went white, she said, "It's a fair wage for a kennel hand, your grace." And then, seeing my face, "Don't. If you go and shout at your steward, everyone in this hold will know exactly why, and I have to live here." That she was afraid of exactly one thing on this earth, and it wasn't the wolves, and it wasn't me. It was Osric writing her a bad character and putting her back on the road. And that grieve had been carrying her glove home to the hold gate every night for 7 days before that feast, 7 nights running, the old campaigner picking a mud-stiff kennel glove out of the straw and carrying it up to the gate and dropping it there and going back, and that the gate guard had been quietly returning it to the kennels each morning and telling nobody, because he assumed some fool was teasing the wolves and he didn't want the fool hanged. 7 nights. That wolf had been carrying her to my door for 7 nights, and I'd walked past it in the morning and never once asked whose glove that was. They knew before I did. That's the part I have to live with, and it's a good part, and I'd live with it again. My wolves, the wreckage I made on that moor, the 9 who'd have been right to hate me, spent 7 nights trying to hand me the one good thing left on this earth, and I was too busy being a king with his kennels in order to look down. I'd like to say the hold rose up and loved her. The hold went for her throat. It started with Osric, and I understood Osric, God help me. 31 years he'd given those animals. He'd pulled grief out of his mother with his own hands, and now a girl he'd hired to shovel had done in 40 days what he couldn't do in 5 years, and he was old, and it was killing him, and men who are being killed by something reach for whatever is nearest. What was nearest was talk. She's got the falling sickness herbs from her father's kennel. She's drugging them. She's got more blood. That lot from the flats always had more blood. That's not skill, that's a taint. She's not the first kennel girl to work out the fastest way up out of the straw. That last one got as far as my table. Rennick brought it to me the way you bring a king a thing you're hoping he'll laugh at. I did not laugh at it. Say it again, I said. Rennick looked at Win. Win, to be fair to her, and I'm trying to be fair to her. She deserves that much, Win said. Torin, don't. He's repeating a kitchen. Kill it here. Say it again, Rennick. It's only your grace. You're in that kennel every night until dawn. People have eyes. Yes, I said. Let's use them. Let's all use our eyes. In 5 years, which of you went down there? Nobody said anything. Osric, I said, you went. I'll grant you that in front of everyone you went for 5 years and it broke you, and I have never once forgotten it. Who else? Rennick. You had that saddle made with the wolf on the cantle. Did you ever go down and look at a real one? When you sat at my table the night we buried them and told me a king mustn't grieve stock. My lords, my whole council, my whole hold. In 5 years, exactly 1 person in Veamore went down into that mud and did the work, and she did it for 11 copper a month, and none of you learned her name until a wolf dragged her into a feast. The hall was very quiet. So the next man who tells me what she's after, I said, had better be prepared to tell me what he did. It shut the mouths in the hall. It didn't shut the kitchens. Nothing shuts the kitchens. And Osric, that's the part that still sits in me sideways. Osric went out of that hall with his face gray, and I thought, that's done. And I was wrong. Because I'd made him a small man in front of the hold while defending her, and a small man will find a way to be big again, and there's always a way if you're willing to pay for it. The muster came in the 1st week of the black month. It's an old thing, the Veamore muster. Every year the hold turns out, the levy walks the field, the horns go, and the war wolves are shown to the moor. It's how you tell the country nobody's taken us yet. My father ran it with 40. I'd run it for 7 years with an empty field and a horn and a lie. The council wanted the 9. They are a werewolf line, said Lord Fen, who is 80 and has been correct about everything for 60 years and insufferable for all of them. A line is shown or a line is ended. That is not cruelty, your grace. That is the law of the moor, and it is the same law that keeps 140 men fed in this hold. If the 9 cannot be shown, the 9 are not war wolves. They are 9 old animals eating a soldier's ration each and holding a kennel a levy could sleep in. And I'll say the rest, since no one else will. They cannot be handled, they cannot be mustered, and they have not been able to for 5 years. There is a stone for them in the yard. There has always been a stone for them. Every king before you had the stomach for it. That's what he said to me, word for word. I've had a long time to remember it. They can be handled, I said. By whom? And there it was, right there in front of the whole council, with Osric standing at the door where a houndmaster stands, and Wynne looking at her hands, and my cousin Rennick looking anywhere else. By my kennel hand, I said. A girl of 26, said Fen, in the mud, at 11 copper, with no name and no line and no oath. Your grace, you will put the honor of Vayamore's field into the hands of a servant nobody vouched for. Yes, I said. On what grounds? On the grounds that they chose her, I said, which is more than any of you managed for me. Fen's mouth went flat. Then let it be her, he said. But hear the whole of the law, your grace, and don't make me the villain of it later. If the 9 cannot be walked before the moor at the muster, if they break, if they scatter, if they savage the field, then they are ended that same hour. Not later, not quietly. That is the law your father kept and his father kept, and if you break it for a kennel girl, every levy on this moor will know what your word is worth. He was right. That's the thing about Fen. He was right, and it was still the worst thing that has ever been said in that room. Then it's the muster, I said. I went down to the kennels that night, and I couldn't say it. I sat in the straw with my back against the post and Marrow's weight against my leg. She came to me every night now. She taught the others it was allowed. Blind old Marrow, my herald, and Tamsin Rowe worked a strap across her knees and waited, and I couldn't say it. Say it, your grace, she said at last. They want them at the muster. Her thumbs stopped. All 9, I said, walked before the moor, and if they break. I know what happens if they break, said Tamsin Rowe. My father ran a kennel. I've known that law since I was 6. The lantern hissed. Somewhere down, the run thistle turned over in the straw with a groan like an old man. I can refuse them, I said. I'm the king. I can stand in the yard and say no, and let Fen write me down a fool for 40 years. And then nothing, and then they live. And then they live in there, she said, and she said it gently, and it went in under the ribs the way only a gentle thing does. In the dark, with the pole and the pail, because that's what your no buys them, your grace, 5 more winters of a hatch. You didn't come down here every night for a month to buy them a hatch. I didn't say anything. Ash goes to the gate at dawn, said Tamsin Rowe. Still, every dawn 7 years on she goes and she looks up the road for a wolf that isn't coming. You know what that is. That's not madness. That's a soldier who hasn't been told the war's over. Nobody ever told them, your grace. They came off that moor and got put in a run, and no one has ever once told them they did enough. I put my hand over my eyes. Walk them out, she said. Let the whole moor stand there and look at them. Let the horns go. Let them come off that field on their own feet with the country watching, and let it be the last thing on the record instead of a hatch. That's not the council's cruelty. That's the only kindness left on the table, and I will walk every one of them out there myself if you'll let me. And if they break, I said. Then they break in the open air, said Tamsin Rowe. in front of a king who came down into the mud for them, with a hand on them the whole time. Which is better than they'd have got from anyone else on this earth, and a great deal better than they got from that more. I took my hand off my eyes. 40 days you were furniture, I said. 41. And how long, I said, have you been my kennel hand, Tamsin Rowe, truthfully? She looked at me across the lantern light, and for the first time since Grieve broke his chain in my hall, she was the one who couldn't say the thing. Since the spring, your grace, she said. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked, said Tamsin Rowe, and she went back to her strap, and her hands weren't steady, and it was the first unsteady thing I ever saw her do. Osric came to me 4 days before the muster, and asked for the girl to be put off the field. He did it properly. That's what I want said for him, whatever comes after. He didn't do it in a kitchen. He came up to my chamber with his hat in his hands and 31 years on his back, and he stood on the flags where he'd stood to tell my father a bitch had whelped 9, and he said it to my face. Your grace, don't put her on that field. Sit down, Osric. I'll stand. He turned the hat over. You'll think it's spite. It's a peace spite, I'll grant you that much, and I'm too old to pretend otherwise, but hear the rest before you weigh me. Go on. She can put a hand on them, he said. I've watched it. I've stood in the dark at the end of the run and watched it, more nights than I'll admit to, like a thief watching a house he built. She's got it. Whatever it is, God gave it to her and he didn't give it to me, and that's between me and God. His voice was steady, his hands weren't. But a run isn't a field, said Osric. You know it, you of all men. In that run there's 9 wolves and 1 lantern and a girl who's furniture. On that field there's 400 torches and 800 people and the horns and the drum and the smell of horses in a line, and your grace, they have heard those horns before. Once, on the moor. I sat very still. That's what nobody in your council has the wit to say to you, he said, because none of them were there and I was there when they came back. You want to know what breaks them. It's not the crowd. It's the horn. That's the sound that walked them out to it. You blow that horn on that field, and you are not showing 9 old wolves to the moor. You are taking them back out onto it. And the girl will be standing in the middle of what happens next with nothing on but an apron. The fire cracked. I didn't say anything for a while. So it's her you're afraid for, I said. It's all of them I'm afraid for, said Osric. And if you make me say which, I'll say the wolves, because I'm a houndmaster and I'm honest. But she's 26 and she weighs nothing, and Grieve alone is 9 stone of trained shield breaker with a hole in his head where the Moor got in. Your grace, I'll take the field. Let me. Let it be me. And if they scatter, let it be me they scatter over. And she can stand at the rail and never have to be the reason the record says what it says. And that, God help me, was the honest offer of a good man, and I heard it too late. Because I'd already made him small in front of the hold. And a man who has been made small will offer you his life at noon and do something else at midnight, and both are true. And I have never once been able to untangle which Osric came to me that afternoon. They won't walk for you, I said. You know that. I know it. He put his hat back on. That's the whole of my life, your grace, and I've made my peace with it. Ask me again if I've made peace with her. He went to the door. Osric, your grace. 31 years, I said. When the record's written, that's on it, before her name and before mine. He stood there with his hand on the door a moment, and I couldn't see his face. He said, well, it's a kindness, it's still not a hand on them. And he went out. Wynne came the next day, and Wynne did not have a hat to turn. She came into my study the way she came into everything, which is to say she was already sitting down and already right when you noticed her. Deep green, Sallowfield pearls, 2 years of my counsel's patient carpentry sitting in a chair with its ankles crossed. I've come to release you, she said. I put down the muster roll. Don't look like that, said Wynne. It's not a scene, I loathe scenes. I've come to release you because in about 4 days you are going to do it yourself in front of 800 people. And I would rather leave this hold as the woman who chose than as the woman who was left standing on a field in her good green, while a king went to a kennel gate. Wind. Torin, she held up one finger, just one. 2 years, in 2 years you have never once looked for me in a room. I've watched you do it. You come in and your eyes go round the room and they're looking for the door or for Fen or for the wolf that isn't there anymore. Never for me. It's not a cruelty. It's an inventory. I've been a line on it. I didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been a lie or a wound. And then a chain broke, said Win, and I watched you look for a girl in the mud for the whole rest of that feast. You did it 40 times. I counted because I had nothing else to do and I've always been good at arithmetic. 40 times, Torin, in one evening, more than in 2 years. I'm sorry, I said. Don't. She said it sharply, and then she softened it, which was the most feeling I ever saw Win of the Sallowfield spend on anything. Don't be sorry. Be honest once out loud in front of the people who need to hear it. That's all any of us wanted from you, and none of us have ever had it. You've been a very good king for 7 years, Torin, and you have been a shut door for all of them. And everybody in this hold has been standing outside it being polite about the draft. She stood. For what it's worth, she said at the door, I like her. That's the irritating part. I came in here fully intending to be magnificent about it, and she keeps being likable. She covered for that old man in front of your entire council within a minute of meeting him. Nobody at my father's table has done a decent thing that fast in my lifetime. Wind. You said something to me the night we buried them, I said, that a king mustn't grieve stock. She stopped in the doorway. I know, she said. I've thought about that a great deal lately. It was the sort of thing my mother would have said, and I said it because I was 24 and terrified of you, and I thought it was what strength sounded like. She looked back at me. It was the worst advice anyone ever gave you, and you took it for 5 years. I'd like that on the record too, if we're doing records. And she went, and she was gone from Veamore inside a week, and she wrote me a letter every winter for 11 years, and not one of them was ever anything but kind. I'll say that for Win of the Sallowfield, since nobody else in this telling will. 2 nights before the muster, Grieve failed. We were on the field. We'd been going out at night for a fortnight, Tamsin's idea, and a good one. Walk the ground when it's empty. Let them learn the smell of it with nothing in it. So on the day the ground at least is an old friend. 9 wolves loose on 400 yards of black wet grass, and 1 girl and me, and a lantern we kept low. It went beautifully. That's the thing. It went so beautifully I was standing there in the dark letting myself believe it. Then somewhere up on the hold wall, some fool of a boy, a levy lad, 16 years old, showing off for a girl of his own, and I have never punished him for it and never will, put a muster horn to his mouth and blew it. 1 note, half a note. He got the wind wrong and it broke off flat. It didn't matter. On the moor it was flat too. Marrow was down before the note ended, flat to the grass, blind head up, keening. Ash bolted so fast she went through the rail and out onto the road. Thistle went backwards into the dark with his teeth bare at nothing. 2 of them just stood, and I have seen men do that exact thing, stand perfectly still in the open with the world going by, and it is the worst thing I know. And Grieve came off the ground like something out of the earth and went for the wall. Not at us. Understand that, never at us, not once, not in 7 years. He went for the wall, the way he'd gone for a shield line, because a horn meant a line and a line meant a wall, and there is nothing in that animal's whole body that has ever known what to do with a horn except run at the thing making it. 9 stone of him, full stretch, straight at 40 feet of Veamore stone. I shouted, it did nothing. I had no voice for him, I never had. Tamsin Rowe walked out in front of him. Not ran. I have thought about this every day since, and I am telling you exactly what I saw. She walked 4 steps out into the open grass on his line, and she went down on one knee with her side to him, side, not front, never front, and she put her hands in her lap and looked at the ground. And she said, in an ordinary voice, a voice you'd use about the price of rope, "Grieve, it's the rope, my love, it's only the rope. I've told you about the rope." He hit the grass 8 feet from her and went over sideways in a spray of water and mud and came up with his ruined head swinging. And everything in that animal was still on the wall, still on the line, and he was screaming. You have never heard a werewolf scream, and I hope you never do. And she did not move, and she did not look at him, and she kept talking. 11 copper a month, said Tamsin Rowe to the mud. 11, and the price of hemp's gone to 9 a fathom, so you tell me how a woman's meant to keep a kennel. I said that to the rope maker. He laughed at me. I'd like to see him laugh with your head in his cart, but you'd only be sick in it. You're sick in everything. Grieve came at her. He came at her and stopped, 2 feet off, with his lips off his teeth and his whole scarred body shaking like a struck bell. And she stayed exactly as she was, knee down, hands in her lap, eyes on the ground, talking about rope. And I stood 40 feet away with my heart stopped in my chest, and did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, which was nothing. I did nothing, because I understood, finally, standing there in the wet dark. If I moved, he'd have to choose, and a wolf in that place does not choose. A wolf in that place answers, and the thing he'd answer would be the wall. It went on a long time. I couldn't tell you how long. Long enough that Ash came back through the broken rail on her own and stood in the dark and watched. And then Grieve put his head down. He put his head down, in the mud, in the rain, and he pushed it under her hands the way he'd pushed it under my hand 10,000 times in a tent on that moor. And Tamsin Rowe took his ruined old head in both her arms and put her face down into the wet fur of it and said, still perfectly level, still ordinary, still about nothing, There's my good rope, there's my clever rope. And that wolf shook against her for a quarter of an hour, while a king stood in the grass and watched. We got them in, all 9, it took until 3. I found her afterward at the end of the long run, sitting on her overturned pail with her hands hanging between her knees, and she was shaking so hard the pail was ticking on the stone. Not before, that's what took the top of my head off. Not for a second out there, with 9 stone of shield breaker coming down her line. Only now, with the gate shut and the wolves down and nobody left to be steady for. I got down on my heels in front of her. Your Grace, she said, don't, I'm all right in a minute. You're not. I'm all right in a minute, said Tamsin Rowe. I just have to be somewhere else while I'm not. And her voice went, and she put her hands over her face. I want to tell you I said something worthy. I didn't say anything at all. I sat down on the wet stone beside the pail, the way I'd sat in that straw for a month, and I did the only thing I'd ever been taught by anyone in this world that was worth anything, which she taught me, which is that you come in for nothing. So I came in for nothing, and after a while her hand came off her face and found my sleeve, and she held on to it and I let her, and I didn't move. You walked out in front of him, I said eventually. Yes. Tamsin. There wasn't anybody else on his line, she said into the dark. That's the whole of it, Your Grace. It's not bravery. There was a wall and there was him and there wasn't anybody else standing in between. And if I'd have stepped back, he'd have gone into that stone at full stretch and broken his neck in front of you, and you'd have carried that one too. You carry them all. You think nobody can see it. You've got 110 of them in your face every time somebody blows a horn. I didn't say anything. I couldn't let him be 111, she said. And that not the haul, not the tail, not the glove at the gate. That was the moment, if you want to know when. Sitting on wet stone at 3 in the morning with a woman's fist in my sleeve, hearing her say she'd put herself in front of 9 stone of werewolf not for the wolf, but for what the wolf's death would have done to me. I put my hand over her hand on my sleeve. Say it, she said. Say what? Whatever you've been not saying for 5 weeks, said Tamsin Rowe. You come down here every night, your grace, every night. You sit in my straw and you don't want anything and you never say it, and I have spent 5 weeks being furniture for a king, and I'm tired, and I've just been screamed at by a wolf, and I would like one true sentence before I go to bed. So I gave her the true sentence. They knew before I did, I said. She lifted her head. 7 nights he carried your glove to my gate, I said. 7. He put it down where I'd walk over it every morning of my life. Marrow came to me because you told her it was allowed. Don't tell me otherwise. I've watched her look at you first. She asks you. That blind old woman asks your permission to love me. Every one of them has been trying to hand you to me since the spring, and I walked past it in my good coat because I was a king with his kennels in order. My voice went somewhere I couldn't hold. The night that chain broke, Tamsin, the thing in my chest that hasn't been awake since the moor, it came to the door. Before you'd said a word, before I had your name. It came to the door and it looked out, and it's been standing there ever since with its head up. And I have been going down to my own kennels at 3 in the morning for 5 weeks like a thief, because I did not have the courage to say to you what 9 broken animals worked out about me in 40 days. She was very still. Which is what, she said. That I don't come down here for the wolves, I said. Not anymore. I did in the spring. I don't now. I come down here because it's the only room in Vaymore where I'm not the king who walked 110 of them onto a moor, and I'd like God, Tamsin, I'd like it to be a room I'm allowed in. The rain went on the roof. You're the king, she said unsteadily. It's your kennel. It's your kennel, I said. It has been since the Feast of Marrow, and everybody in this hold knows it but the ledger. And Tamsin Rowe laughed one wrecked, wet laugh with her fist still in my sleeve and said, 11 copper. And then she cried properly, finally, an hour after it was safe to. And I sat in the wet and I let her. And I did not put my arms around her because she hadn't asked, and because she was 26 and shaking, and I was the king who paid her wage. And there is a word for a man who takes a moment like that, and it isn't mine. I sat there, that's all, until it was over and she took her hand back and stood up and said, 2 days, in a voice she put back together herself. 2 days, I said. Then I'd better sleep. At the doorway she stopped. Your grace. When you say it, the true thing, the one you've actually not been saying, don't say it here. Not in the straw at 3 in the morning where it costs you nothing and nobody hears it, and I can never once repeat it without a kitchen calling me a liar. I got to my feet. Where then, I said. Somewhere with witnesses, said Tamsin Rowe, or don't say it at all. I'd rather have the straw and my 11 copper than be a thing a king said in the dark. Osric's stable boy came to my door at dawn on the day of the muster, and would not look at me, and I knew before he opened his mouth that we had a much older problem than a horn.